What if I told you that Britain's most audacious gold heist didn't just steal from a vault but poisoned lives, wrecked families, and left behind a trail of death, betrayal, and a curse that still echoes to this day? This isn't just a robbery story. This is the kind of madness you wouldn't believe if it weren't all real. It began on a cold, silent morning in November 1983. Heathrow Airport was still yawning awake. Inside Unit 7 of the Heathrow International Trading Estate sat what was believed to be one of the most secure vaults in the world, the Brinks-Mat facility. No one expected trouble, but 6 men were already watching, waiting, armed, and very determined. By 6:40 a.m., the silence shattered. The gang didn't waste time. They burst into the compound with military precision shotguns ready, ski masks tight, voices sharp. They weren't guessing their way through this job. They had inside help. One of the security guards, Anthony Black, had been seduced not by greed, but by blood. He was living with the sister of Brian Robinson, one of the heist's leaders. That connection would prove to be the first domino in a chain of chaos. Their original target, a modest payday, £3 million in untraceable cash. But the vault had a different plan. One of the guards, shaking, stammering, forgot part of the security code. Tension surged. The crew grew agitated. Time was slipping. That's when they started prying further. What they found next was not part of any plan. Inside the vault were over 70 cardboard boxes. Inside those boxes, more than 7,000 gold bars. 3 tons of pure gold, £26 million worth. Plus a generous helping of diamonds, cut and uncut, bound for the Far East. In a single twist of fate, a quick smash and grab had become the biggest gold heist in British history. Suddenly, the game had changed. What was meant to take minutes dragged into nearly 2 hours. The crew, realizing the magnitude of their discovery, scrambled for a new plan. They brought in forklifts, moving ton after ton of treasure into their getaway van. Time ticked. Pressure mounted. But eventually, at 8:15 a.m., they rolled out of the depot, the weight of fortune in their rearview mirror. And just before they vanished into London's grey skyline, one of the robbers turned to the terrified guards and smirked. "Merry Christmas." That wasn't sarcasm. That was prophecy. By 8:30 a.m., one of the guards had wriggled free and called the police. But by then, the gold was already gone. News of the heist ripped through the city like a bomb. Headlines screamed. Radios buzzed. And Scotland Yard's flying squad, led by Commander Frank Cater, launched a nationwide hunt. But the thieves weren't amateurs, they were ghosts. And the gold? It would become the most cursed fortune Britain had ever known. Back in Bath, over 100 miles away, a curious couple noticed something strange. Their neighbor's yard had an odd metallic stench. Smoke wafted from a small outbuilding. When they peeked in, they saw a crucible still hot-sitting in plain sight. They called the police, but shockingly the officers brushed it off as a non-issue. No statements, no follow-up. That mistake would come back to haunt them, because while the police missed the first big clue, the thieves were already setting a new plan in motion. You see, gold is not easy to sell, especially gold that's 99.99% pure and freshly stolen. Serial numbers trace. Buyers ask questions. And that's where Kenneth Noy came in. Noy was no street-level thug. He was a smooth-talking, sharply dressed player deep in the shadows of organized crime. He had to contact John Palmer, a respected gold dealer. On the surface, Palmer ran a legitimate business, but behind closed doors he was the perfect fence. Palmer had everything: a private smelter in his backyard, contacts and jewelry, and access to one of the cleanest laundromats for dirty money, Hatton Garden. The plan was simple: erase the evidence, remove serial numbers, melt the bars, mix with cheaper alloys, then recast and sell it like nothing ever happened. And it worked almost too well. They fed the reprocessed gold into legitimate markets, secured VAT refunds they weren't entitled to, and cashed in through exchanges. Over 13 million pounds flowed through the system. At one point, so much gold moved through a single Bristol bank that even the Bank of England started asking questions. But by the time red flags were raised, it was already too late. While the gold was being laundered, the original gang members were making mistakes. Lavish mistakes. Brian Robinson and Mickey McAvoy, the operation's front men, traded their modest council flats for sprawling estates. McAvoy even bought 2 enormous Rottweilers, naming them almost mockingly Brinks and Matt. It didn't take long for neighbors to talk. And when police looked into Anthony Black, who conveniently missed work the morning of the robbery, they found the thread that unraveled it all. Under pressure, Black cracked. He gave up the names, the roles, the map. And the first arrest was swift Brian Robinson, dragged from his Kent mansion in December 1983. McAvoy followed. Their plan for quiet retirement had crumbled in under a month. But the deeper story was just beginning, because while the robbers were being caged, the gold was still out there, morphing, disappearing, circulating into the very economy it had tried to destroy. Police surveillance soon zeroed in on Kenneth Noy. His mansion in Kent sat behind high hedges, thick gates, and a web of secrets. And then the nightmare deepened. In 1985, while undercover officer D.C. John Fordham staked out Noy's estate, a confrontation exploded. Noy, discovering the officer on his land, stabbed him to death. He claimed self-defense, and to the shock of the nation, he walked free. But not for long. 11 gold bars were found buried on his property. The game was up. He was later sentenced to 14 years, but served just 7. And by the time he walked free again, the curse of the Brinks-Matt gold had already started claiming more victims, more betrayals, more blood. And while the trial headlines faded, one question still echoed in backrooms, alleyways, and even luxury boardrooms: where was the rest of the gold? Because here's the kicker: the authorities only ever recovered a small portion of the original loot. The rest, it vanished. Some say it was melted and sold abroad. Others believe it funded empires, nightclubs, real estate, even drug shipments that flooded Britain in the late 80s. But whispers suggest something darker. Some say it was buried, hidden, somewhere in the fields of Kent or beneath South London lockups, shielded by silence and guarded by men willing to die or kill for what was left. And maybe that's exactly what happened, because soon people connected to the heist began to die, one by one, mysteriously, brutally. What happened next didn't just shake London. It opened the gates of hell. When the gold disappeared, something far more sinister took its place. It wasn't just a treasure that vanished, it was a ticking time bomb. And piece by piece, the people who had touched it began to die. Not in courtrooms, not behind bars, but on the streets, in their homes, and sometimes without a trace. By 1985, as the trials wrapped up and the press turned to other scandals, the real story was only getting started, and its first chapter was written in blood. Detective Constable John Fordham never saw it coming. While investigating Kenneth Noy, still suspected of handling Brink's Matt Gold, Fordham was staking out Noy's Kent estate. It was supposed to be routine, silent, and visible, but when Noy discovered the officer hiding in the underbrush, he didn't hesitate. 10 stab wounds, that's what it took. Noy claimed self-defense. Say he feared for his life, and somehow the jury believed him. He walked out of court, free, smirking. The gold had bought him silence, but justice would return for him eventually. Still, by then the curse had already begun to spread. See, Brink's Matt wasn't just a heist, it was a virus. And everyone who handled even a gram of that cursed gold seemed to end up cursed themselves. Take John Palmer. To the outside world, he was a clean-cut businessman, a jeweler, a man with money, contacts, and a home smelter where gold flowed like water. But behind the smiles and showroom lights, he was the mastermind who melted Brink's Matt gold into history. In 1984, just months after the heist, Palmer was arrested. But he pulled the oldest trick in the book. He claimed he didn't know the gold was stolen. The jury bought it. He walked, but the gold followed him. In 2001, Palmer was caught again, this time for a massive timeshare fraud scheme that fleeced over 20,000 people out of £30 million. He was jailed, released, and later investigated in Spain for another string of crimes. He had made an empire off the shadows. Then in 2015, John Palmer was found shot dead in his garden. No suspects, no motive, no answers. Only the gold. And it didn't stop there. Brian Perry, another shadowy figure who helped dispose of the stolen bullion, was found shot in the head in 2001, killed just yards away from where George Francis, another Brink's Matt associate, had been murdered 2 years earlier. Charlie Wilson, yes, that Charlie Wilson, one of the infamous great train robbers, was gunned down in his Spanish villa in 1990. The theory? Brink's Matt money had gone missing, and someone wanted blood. Then there was Nick Whiting, shot, stabbed, dumped in Essex like yesterday's trash. He too had ties to the gold. Jeweler Solly Nam was shot outside his Hatton Garden home in 1998. He'd helped clean the gold. That was his mistake. By the early 2000s, the number of violent deaths linked to Brink's Matt had climbed above 10. Some called it coincidence. Others called it a curse. And still, the gold remained missing. Not all of it, of course. A few bars turned up in strange places. One was found in a safety deposit box in Luxembourg. Another was traced through serial numbers to a black market sale in Belgium. But most of it? Gone. Evaporated into real estate, shell companies, luxury cars, and plastic surgery. And in 1995, the High Court tried to bring it all back. They slapped Mickey McAvoy, the original heist leader, with a £27 million compensation order. The message was clear: return the gold or pay for it in full. But there was nothing to return. McAvoy's share had already vanished into properties, women, and crooked investments. He tried to cut a deal, but there was nothing left to bargain with. And so, the courts didn't stop there. They went after Brian Robinson, ordered him to repay £26 million, plus interest. Even his wife was hit with a £1.1 million debt. They went after Perry, Palmer, anyone who was still breathing and had once held that cursed treasure. But the law could only do so much, because the gold had done its real damage in silence. Buried deep in shell companies laundered through offshore accounts and stamped into the walls of East London penthouses, the Brinksmat gold was now part of the city itself. It funded nightclubs in Soho. It bought warehouses in Docklands. It helped fuel the rise of Britain's cocaine market. And yet, no one could point to a single vault, a single safe, a single man and say, there. That's where it ended, because it never ended. Even the Bank of England got burned. Just a year after the heist, Johnson Matthey Bank, the same company whose bullion had been stolen, collapsed. The Bank of England had to step in and take over to avoid a total market crisis. The losses? Over $300 million. Loans to criminals. Fraudulent clients. Gaps in the books no one could explain. It was like the heist had punched a hole in the British financial system, and the rot kept spreading. Investigators chased the money for years. They uncovered a money laundering ring that stretched from London to Panama, Jersey, and Switzerland. One key suspect, Gordon Parry, used offshore firms to funnel over £10 million into properties, farmlands, and schools. He left no fingerprints. But then came the moment that truly shattered all logic. In 1984, just a few weeks after the heist, Austrian police arrested 5 men in a Vienna hotel. With them, they found 10 gold bars. At first glance, the bars looked real. They had the exact serial numbers stolen from Heathrow. But when the police tested them, they weren't gold, they were tungsten. Gold-coated counterfeits. The question wasn't just who faked the bars, but how they got the real serial numbers. These weren't public. These were internal, locked away. So how did counterfeiters in Austria get access to confidential British gold bar numbers? Some believed it was a decoy, a double cross, a trap. Others believed it was something darker, that someone somewhere was planting evidence to steer investigators away from the real stash. But no one could answer the question, and by now those who might have had were already dead. Meanwhile, in South London and Kent, the whispers grew louder. Not everyone believed the gold had been smelted or sold. Rumors swirled of buried treasure, lockups filled with bullion, fields where something glimmered beneath the soil, and slowly a new kind of criminal emerged, younger, hungrier, raised on tailies of Brinksmat, determined to find what their predecessors left behind. Some of them are still looking. Others aren't around anymore to keep searching. Because if there's one thing the Brinksmat curse has taught us, it's that nothing is ever really free, not even gold. And as we head into the final chapter, there's one last question we need to ask. What if the curse wasn't a myth? What if it's still alive, still watching, still waiting? Now, get ready, because the darkest secrets haven't been revealed yet, and the final body hasn't dropped. By now you've heard the legend, the gold that cursed everyone who touched it, the heist that triggered a bloodbath, the loot that vanished, and yet somehow seemed to own every room it entered. But here's what they didn't tell you. That gold may still be out there, and some people would kill to find it. Let's rewind. When the Brinksmat gold disappeared, so did the rules. It didn't just seep into the criminal underworld. It slipped into schools, property markets, banks, and governments. It reshaped entire industries. And if you bought gold jewelry in Britain after 1984, there's a terrifying chance you wore part of it on your neck. That's how deep this rabbit hole goes. But just as the gold spread into daylight, the darkness followed. By the mid-2000s, over £25 million had been recovered through arrests, court orders, and asset seizures. But that was only a piece of the puzzle. What happened to the rest? Let's talk about the Panama Papers. In 2016, an international leak exposed one of the biggest money laundering networks in history. Among the names, a web of offshore accounts, nominee directors, and shell companies that all traced back like a blood-stained fingerprint to one thing: the Brinks-Matt Gold. An offshore firm in Jersey, fronted by fake directors and bearer shares, was found to be a key laundering route. The same companies that moved Brinks-Matt money also funneled cash into London's luxury housing boom. Properties in Chelsea, warehouses in Docklands, farmhouses gifted to mistresses, all scrubbed clean with gold that once lay in a secure Heathrow vault. And yet still no one could say for sure how much remained, because now the hunt wasn't just criminal, it was generational. The curse had moved on. A new breed of gangster had picked up the scent. Sons of the original players, cousins, apprentices, street soldiers raised on bedtime stories about the biggest score in British history. These weren't robbers, they were treasure hunters, and they weren't just looking for profit, they were chasing legacy. Some believe the remaining gold is buried hidden somewhere in South London lockups or deep in the fields of Kent, sealed in concrete, guarded by silence. Others believe it's long gone washed into the bloodstream of London finance, powering real estate empires and offshore trusts. But here's what we know: the deaths haven't stopped. Even as recently as 2015, John Palmer, the man who smelted the original gold, was assassinated in his garden. Shot 6 times. No arrests. No motive, Brian Perry. Gunned down at work, George Francis. Murdered on his doorstep. Nick Whiting, stabbed, shot, dumped. Charlie Wilson, executed in his Spanish villa. It's like the gold was collecting debts, settling old scores. The Brinks-Matt curse became a myth, then a joke, and then something far more chilling, a pattern. And just when it seemed the blood had dried, something else happened, something no one expected. Johnson Matthey Bank, the very institution whose gold was stolen, collapsed a year after the heist. Not from theft, from fraud. Over $300 million in shady loans to organized crime figures. Records destroyed. Gaps unexplained. It wasn't just gold that went missing. It was trust, credibility, the very fabric of British financial stability. The Bank of England had to step in, quietly, discreetly. They had to save the system before the rot spread further. And that's when the whispers began, that maybe, just maybe, the heist wasn't just an outside job, that someone inside the system wanted that gold gone. And suddenly, the story twists again. Because what if this wasn't just a robbery? What if it was a cover-up? A planned transfer of wealth from the shadows into the mainstream? Disguised as a crime but orchestrated by hands wearing white gloves? What if the gold isn't lost, but protected? Because every time investigators got close, someone died. Every time someone opened their mouth, a bullet found them. Every time a lead emerged, it vanished in paperwork, red tape, or concrete. And here's where things turn truly dark. It's said that a private investigator, Daniel Morgan, was digging too deep. In 1987, he was found in his car, axe to the head. Brutal, personal. He was investigating corruption within the police, and he'd begun looking into Brink's Matt. He never made it to his next meeting. Another coincidence? Or just another ghost in the vault? Because the deeper you go, the more you realize this wasn't just a heist. It was a transformation. Brink's Matt marked the moment British organized crime stopped stealing and started investing. The gold-funded clubs, real estate, narcotics, even political campaigns. The curse wasn't that people died. The curse was that some of them lived long enough to turn dirty gold into clean empires. And as for the loot, some say it's still out there, waiting, rotting beneath a farmhouse, sealed inside a forgotten shipping container, or worn proudly by the unknowing on fingers, wrists, and necks. It's become part of us now. That's what makes the Brink's Matt story different. It didn't end, it became the system. And the loudest bang? It's not the shot that killed Palmer, not the stab that silenced Fordham, not the door that burst open at Heathrow that frozen morning in '83. No, the loudest bang is still coming, because the last piece of gold has yet to surface, and when it does, someone's going to die for it. So if you're ever offered a gold chain, a strange bar, a deal too good to be true, ask yourself one thing: is this part of the curse? Because when it comes to Brink's Matt, gold never dies, and neither does the darkness that follows it.